Hello and welcome to The Four Top. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. Episode 62 will drop in early July, so we're going to celebrate Independence Day in Four Top fashion by digging into the state of food in the United States of America. We will discuss Mexican and American cuisine, the concept of the American family dinner, and what is American food after all. Here in the studios of OPB, we are joined by Erin DeJesus, Deputy Editor at Eater. So glad to have you here.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And Juan Ramirez, a freelance journalist and the producer of the Racist Sandwich podcast. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
And Heather Arndt Anderson, a botanist, food historian, blogger, and author. Hello.
Hi.
So let's try to get going on these topics, guys. We have a really kind of a lineup of really expansive topics, but I think we can make some sense out of them. So first, I'm just going to throw out there, what does the term American food mean to us today? Erin DeJesus, as deputy editor at Eater, I can't think of anyone better to ask this question of. It's almost July 4th. People think of these stereotypical hamburgers, coleslaw, potato salad, but I feel like these types of foods don't really represent the way Americans eat anymore, do they?
Well, I think we all sitting here at the table would agree that we all still eat and love these things. In my brain, I sort of categorize this as like cookout, backyard barbecue type of food. But I do think you're right, and this is something that I find myself thinking about daily, if not hourly, and that the way that we talk about what American food is has deeply, deeply changed. So just for example, since I guess no one can see me, I'm Chinese American, first generation here in the U.S. My parents immigrated in the late 70s and early 80s. So for me, what American food was all the stuff you would see on commercials on TV that my mom was not making at home. So, hot dogs, hamburgers, coleslaw, potato salad, mac and cheese, mashed potatoes with gravy, like Thanksgiving-y foods, and all that sort of thing. But I think where we are now is that we've sort of all taken a step back and are starting to acknowledge that American food is much broader than that, and it can encompass so many different kinds of cuisines that just happen to be made here in America right now.
For sure. Heather, as a food historian, how has the concept of American food changed over the centuries in your estimation?
Well, we're a country of immigrants, and so even the foods that we think of as being quintessential American foods are actually German or, English. They're not the Three Sisters, We're not considering beans, squash, and corn to be American foods, even though they are American crops. So the influences of outsiders have always been felt on the table. And today, I think that we're seeing that shift in a more sped up kind of pace because we have immigrants coming from so many other places besides just a few countries. Over the centuries, though, the foods that we considered to be the first American foods and the foods that appeared in the earliest American cookbooks were very much influenced by the way the British were eating because that's where most of the people were coming from originally. The first white people to come to the U.S. or to America.
Yeah, you raise a good point, which is truly American food is probably from our First Nations indigenous cuisine. We talked about this in episode 38, and I know Eater has run an editorial by Sean Sherman, the Sioux chef. Sioux is S-I-O-U-X, little play on words there. Is that cuisine kind of having a resurgence right now, Erin?
I'm hesitant to call it a full-on resurgence. However, again, as we said earlier, it's definitely more at the forefront of conversation now, the idea that what we call American food is, frankly, the food of the colonizers who came over. Sean is just one of many chefs who are, entering the spotlight and presenting, arguments, sometimes, in very forward ways to say that this is the cuisine of the native peoples here. This is what, unfortunately, when Europeans came over, was sort of taken over when it came to talking about what American food is.
I think that regional foods in the U.S. have always been influenced by the people who were there first. And so in the Pacific Northwest, where we are recording today, we still think of salmon and berries as being very much part of our regional culinary identity. And those were foods of the first people here. And I think that corn products, the use of cornmeal instead of wheat meal or wheat flour was a very early adoption of native cuisine by the colonizers.
For sure. Juan, I feel like today eating in America is more of a political statement than it ever was before. Do you think that food and politics are tied up today in a way that they weren't previously?
Well, I think food has always been like a political statement. I don't know. The way that we talk about food, like, has always changed. In different aspects. Like, for example, I was doing some research before I came to the topic here to talk, and I was thinking about like what is American food, right? And I was looking into one of the earliest Mexican foods that was introduced to I wouldn't say to the U.S. and one of them was el tamal or tamale, right? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, it was introduced in the 1800s, and around the same time, that's when the hot dog term got coined in 1901, mm-hmm. and hamburgers, as we know it today, were created around that time. And pizza wasn't until almost like the 1910s. Mm-hmm. So what is really American? What do we believe American food is if a tamal was already made, here around that time? Mm-hmm. Was already introduced to the, I guess, European Americans. Mm-hmm.
So. I feel like when I see Mexican or Latin American food as enfolded into the American diet, we usually slap the word Tex on it or California as a way to still put a white person stamp on it. And it's always been very confusing to me. Juan, do you have some perspective on that?
Well, so Tex-Mex food is its own thing. A lot of Mexicans don't think for example, a burrito is not Mexican food. Mm-hmm. That was. I don't know, people are gonna.
You're
hate
afraid
me
of
for
being
this.
political.
Yeah, but it's like okay, it's either from California or Texas. Mm-hmm. I'll leave it at that. But it's not Mexican. Mm-hmm. It's not a Mexican dish. And so if you go to Mexico and you talk about what American food is, definitely a burrito will be one of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is that exactly. It's who gets to decide and who is placing these labels on a particular cuisine or a particular dish and for what purpose. I think in a lot of places it happens in almost sort of like an othering way, both negatively for the obvious reasons and also positively. Like there's so much conversation now about what is quote unquote authentic and who gets to call something authentic, and to claim something as Mexican means something very different if you are a Mexican or Mexican American versus someone else saying oh, I want what I think Mexican food is, and it's using that label in different ways. So I think that's where a lot of this conversation is centering around right now. And when it comes to the word American specifically, you do see a lot of this reclamation of, culture is saying that, this is, I want to call this Chinese American food. This is something different than Chinese food. This is a distinct identity, and it is American.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw, I sent out a link that it was a very funny article of what other countries think of as American food. And so it was a picture in China, what we think of as Chinese food, they call it American food because it's actually Chinese American food, and no one actually eats any of it. And like you said, burritos, we think of that as Mexican food. But.
I mean, with Chinese food, if you think of Chinese takeout, most of the people think of Panda Express, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Panda Express came from Pasadena. Yeah. It was made. It was Panda Inn. That was the original restaurant, and then they created their off into Panda Express. Panda Express, and so that's the international known Chinese food is Panda Express, and it's quintessential American food.
Yeah. Chinese people have also been on the west coast of America for as long as our states have been in statehood. So to say that Chinese Americans aren't making American food or vice versa is kind of misguided, I think.
There was I was listening to an interview somewhere, and a person asked what do you think of what do you think you would take from being an immigrant in the U.S. and coming back home, like what's the difference, or what do you think about that process? And so the person answered, well, you know what, like when I moved to the U.S., it was kind of like a timestamp, right? Like I moved to the U.S. and basically what I took from my country, that's all I knew. And when I went back to my country, things had changed, had evolved. But what I knew of my country, it was that timestamp that I took in the first place. So it was like, to me, that's what I think about food, right? Like food is always evolving, like everywhere, like in Mexico, in any place of earth is always evolving. But we tend to think of food as a very black and white thing, and it's more complex than that. You know, we just think of like it should be that way because that's how, you know, I learned back home. When you go back home, it's like, oh, you know, they're doing something else with it already.
It's evolved.
Yeah, that timestamp idea is so interesting to me because I think a lot of how we all define certain cuisines is very based on nostalgia and very based on what we grew up with. So for me, American food is it is almost othering in a way. It's the food that my mother was not cooking at home, but that I wanted and that I saw my classmates eating in the cafeteria. I mean, do you feel like a similar thing happens with you and how you define American food?
Yeah, you know, well, going back to like eating, you know, so I came to the country when I was 10 years old. So, you know, I did see a difference from, you know, eating at school and eating at home. And one of the things that when they would serve a certain food, they served chalupas. And I remember, like, I've never had a chalupa before. I didn't even know what that was, you know. And I learned that here in school, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's what a chalupa looks.
It's a marketing concept.
Yes, you know, and even like the nachos, like with cream, that's very American. Like that's very like Tex-Mex. But yeah, so it's something new. It was something new for me.
Apologies, we have some construction sounds in the background.
It's like, is somebody running a paper shredder?
No, OPP has been under renovation for many months now, so apologies, Juan.
When I think about like American food versus like Mexican food, you know, I think of what I learned here versus what I had home. But now, as like, you know, as my palate has changed and evolved, like I've think of like many international foods as American because I've had them here. For example, you know, what you would say like pho or something like that. You know, that's, you know, obviously that's not an American quote unquote food, but for me, that's something that I've experienced here, and it's, you know, it's becoming part of like the diet and the culture.
It's definitely,
like,
yeah.
You know, like who hasn't had pho before? You know,
yeah, it's part of our landscape now, and to still call it an ethnic food is, you know, we're all eating ethnic food. Then there's a pho. I mean, in Portland, Oregon, we're very lucky that there's pho everywhere, and so you really can.
Or tacos.
Yeah, tacos. That's true.
Juan, I loved what you said about the timestamp and traveling and coming back, because I was thinking about this very thing about, you know, travelers who are our grandparents' age, you know, when they went to other countries and came back, they'd say, oh, I can't wait to have some meat and potatoes, some good old American meat and potatoes. And I feel like when I go to another country and come back, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get that poke I love so much, or that, you know, avocado toast, or whatever it is, you know, that everyone's eating right now, but it has no resemblance whatsoever to the meat and potatoes that my grandparents ate.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, you know, our, you know, again, it's not just mine. I think it's like our palate in general is changing as, you know, we're being exposed to all these other cuisines from other people, and people are taking, you know, they're actually going out and eating, you know, other cuisines, whereas before, you know, I don't know whether it was because of a racial thing or they weren't as exposed to like other cultures. It wasn't happening. I mean, sure it was. I mean, there's one of the oldest restaurants in LA was Mexican restaurants in LA was literally a building that looked like a tamal, you know? So that's, you know, it's always been there, you know. It's just, I think now we're getting to the point where people are actually telling their stories, and we're hearing more stories about it. So it's becoming more popular, I guess.
We've been eating out more, too, though, over the last few decades. So access to other cuisines has become more available, which, you know, my parents never ate out except for, like, if it was an anniversary or a really special occasion. And now dining out is a form of entertainment that's accessible to most people, in some form at least. And so that really has ramped up our exposure to cultures that we never would have experienced before.
Actually, sitting here wondering as you're talking, Heather, I did want to ask you just how you thought or how you think the hamburger became like flattened and almost shorthand for what we consider American food. Like, is it purely just, you know, the McDonald's effect? Like, they basically Ray Kroc Escoffier that system and, you know, made fast food so pervasive that all of a sudden the hamburger just became American? Or
yeah, you know, I actually, it's so funny that I'm embarrassed to say that the invention and development of fast food is kind of a blind spot for me. I know that his process was very much influenced by like Henry Ford and having this sort of streamlined process where things could be done all at once and then cooked, you know, really fast. So putting it on this kind of almost like a conveyor belt, the flat patty was going to create an advantage for that type of method of cooking. But I don't even know what the original hamburger, if there was a hamburger in Hamburg, Germany, I don't even know what that would look like. I think about Salisbury steak as being, or those kind of tenderized steaks as being more of the type of tenderized patty that we would have had access to. But yeah, I have no idea.
Sorry to put you on the spot. But yeah, no, it's something that I find just fascinating, like whether that era in like the 1950s, 60s-ish, I think, when, you know, American food became this like very, you know, like frozen, flash-dried, canned, and because it was supposed to be healthier for you, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It is related to all of that.
The canned goods stuff was definitely like the, you know, wave of the future pre-World War II. That was like the 30s or so. And then the backyard cookout burger thing, that happened post-war when meat rationing had ended and people had more of this. There was the leisure class sort of emerging and the suburbia was emerging. And then there's also some fun gender stuff too, like backyard cookouts were like the one place where men could cook without compromising their masculinity. So yeah, as long as you were cooking a piece of meat in the outdoors, you were safe. No one was going to doubt that you were a man. So yeah, there are a lot of different cultural phenomena co-occurring with the changes in the way we eat, and that's a different topic, though, I think.
Well, we should probably move on to our second course, and we've already kind of touched upon a bit of it, but I want to dig a little deeper, Juan. Pulling apart you know, what is the difference between Mexican cuisine and Mexican American cuisine? And we've talked a little bit about, you know, the burrito is not Mexican.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there are certain restaurants here that serve tater tots and call it Mexican food.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of the way people talk about Mexican food and Mexican American food, and how are we getting it wrong and how are we getting it right?
I think one of the biggest difference is obviously ingredients. So ingredients is one of the things that Mexicans don't really use, like cheese, like Swiss cheese or cheddar.
Melted
You know,
cheddar.
so yeah, definitely that's one of the things that you can differentiate between like Tex-Mex or Mexican American food versus Mexican food. Also, Mexican food, although they use a lot of deep fried things, it's not a big thing to use, like, you know, like deep fried like chips, stuff like that. That's it's not really part of it. I mean, you could have, like, people have said, you know, like, oh, well, do you ever eat like tortilla shell taco? Yeah, I mean, there's like taco dorados, like that does exist, but it does not look exactly like what you would think a shell, you know, a hard shell taco looks like. Yeah, it's completely different. So yeah, for one is ingredients, the way that people talk about it. I think the Mexican cuisine, it varies. It's very vast. It's one of the richest like cuisines like in the world. It's very difficult to make depending on the plate, obviously. But I think Mexican American food, in a sense, is kind of like almost like fast food. You know, it's like you can make it with for that afternoon, or at the end of the day, you can have it for dinner, or not that there's nothing wrong with that, but it is different in a sense that Mexican cuisine, it's I guess the way to make it. I don't know. It's the ingredients. It's I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's just harder to make if you're gonna make a plate of like mole, for example. That's gonna take you about a week just to create the sauce.
Yeah.
Whereas like chili, some chili. I don't know. Like.
So what you're saying is Mexican American food is dumbed down.
Well, I wouldn't say that specifically, but it's. It's not. It's easier to make.
Erin Eater has been running this amazing series, The United States of Mexican Food.
Yes.
Did you work on that?
I did, yes, along with many, many, many colleagues. But yes, I was lucky enough to work on that package.
And what made you come up with the idea of running that package, and what did you all learn as part of researching and assigning those stories?
Yeah, when it comes to what made us decide to run it, it's just that I think Mexican food, for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned, Juan, is so at the forefront of conversation right now, and in many ways, often in an overly simplified way, where a lot of the statement is like Mexican food is American food. Now, I think, thankfully, is actually so strikingly obvious to people.
Yeah.
People have that baseline knowledge and acknowledgement that you can go a step deeper into that and see, like, okay, what does this really mean? It means, a lot of regionally specific foods, as we mentioned. It means, looking into, I think, our sort of Eater shorthand of it was the Chipotleification of Mexican food in America, and the emergence of the mission burrito as the burrito that most, American readers would visualize when they thought of one. And it came looking a lot into, what authenticity, quote unquote, means, and I think more specifically how that is often a trap, or how often that very much limits conversations that you can have about a very broad type of cuisine. So
I don't know why I just feel like I have to mention the Cali burrito. Can we talk about it for a second? Does everyone know what a Cali burrito is? As far as I can tell, it's just a giant burrito stuffed with French fries. Is this correct?
I've never heard of this thing, this marvelous beast you describe.
No, when you say the Cali burrito, I think of like the San Francisco mission burrito,
which
it is basically the Chipotle style
know.
burrito with the rice and the beans and the
cheese and the corn.
and then your choice of meat.
But for whatever reason, I've been seeing like references to it everywhere lately. It just seems like sort of the epitome of taking something and Americanizing it to the
Like
extreme.
an Idaho burrito. I mean, if we're being honest, well, actually, the potato's from Peru, so I don't know. Yeah, but what part of the potato makes it California style?
Well, you know what? Actually, can I go back a little bit into like something that you mentioned, Americanizing Mexican food, and back to the conversation about the tamal, right? There's a history of the tamal, and there's actually a thing called the tamale trail in the South, and basically that's when Mexican labor workers and African Americans would work together, and so African Americans adopted the tamal and started creating their own versions of it with pork, and so like there's this whole version of a tamal that is actually, American, and that's a different way of like creating your own cuisine. Like that's something that it's a Mexican food, but it's actually American, and it's not done by Mexican Americans. It's done by African Americans, and then you take that specific cuisine and you create it your own. You make it your own, and I think I think. That's a good way to honor somebody else's like cuisine, in my perspective, because they made it their own in a different way rather than just putting some, I don't know, fries inside something, burrito.
Seems like such a cop-out. You just reminded me of being in Sicily on a trip where I was trying all the really typical thin pizzas and went into this restaurant that was supposed to be very authentic, and all these teenagers were ordering the pizzas and then ordering French fries and then putting the French fries on top of the pizzas. So people will make their mashups wherever,
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like what would Italian food be without tomatoes?
Right.
And the tomatoes came from, an American crab. So.
But would Thai food or Indian food be without the chile?
Yeah.
That's
even Mexican food. A lot of Mexican food.
That's right.
Mexican food. Because if you think about it, like, and I'm just a nerd like that, but a lot of the food that we know also comes from the Iberian Peninsula, and so the Iberian Peninsula has. We have a bunch of like Moroccan like influence foods, a bunch of like Japanese influence food because of the trade with Japan, and obviously like Indian food as well too.
The chiles and nogadas is like 2/3 of that dish is actually from Europe. They're not indigenous ingredients, and it's just become so ingrained in the culture and the cuisine that's the thing that I geek out on the most. I'm also really interested in Chinese food in Mexico because it's huge. Like that's the kind of thing when I think about fusion cuisine. That's where I like to approach it from. Is other people, nothing to do with white people. Just what are they doing? Their conversations. What does their food look like?
Yeah, Mexican cuisine and Chinese cuisine, especially like in Mexico. Mexico City has a huge Chinese population, and not just Chinese, just Asian in general. I mean, just to put it out there, one of the most popular influencers on YouTube is Korean.
Oh.
Yeah, and he is like born in Korea, just moved to Mexico a couple of years ago, and became like a national sensation.
Wow!
So there's this huge like. There's a lot of influence, Asian influence in Mexico. I mean, even the Japanese cacahuates, the Japanese peanuts.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the Japanese peanuts, but basically they were made by it's a national snack.
Wow.
Created by a Japanese person.
That's really cool.
So there's a lot of Asian influence in Mexico, and we bring that to the U.S. and then it's just there's a bunch of the world's mixed. Put it that way.
Yes, exactly.
Well, maybe we should move on to our third course. Another aspect of American food is the American family dinner. It looks a lot different today than it did a few decades ago. Heather Arndt Anderson, you're a food historian, and I'm wondering what your idea of the term family dinner is when you think of family dinner in the United States today. Is it more, and also is this term kind of more fraught here than it is in other countries? Do we put more sort of emotional baggage?
American parents put baggage on everything. I think that we worry way too much about everything. I think that actually in some countries, eating together because of the constraints of parental work life is maybe a little bit less common. But I think that everywhere in the world, people just eat together. And I think that's why in restaurants they call the staff meal family meal. It's a part of our fabric as a species is to break bread together. And obviously lots of science is coming out now. I think that when we are breaking bread together, a lot of different things are happening, and science is coming out that supports this idea that kids, especially adolescents, that's the thing that people like to worry about the most, is what kind of drugs and sex are the kids getting up to? Well, if you are the kind of person who is eating family dinner with your folks every day, it's not just the interrogation. I think that it's just the being seen is valuable to the growing brain, and kids don't just do less bad when they eat with their parents, but they actually do better. They do better emotionally, socially. Their bodies are healthier. And I eat dinner with my family every day. Even if I can't be there at the table with them, I cook the meal so that they can eat it. They can feel my presence looming over them. Yeah, and even though I grew up really poor and we didn't have a lot to eat, we still always ate together. And for better or worse, my dad was kind of mean, but, we still always ate together.
Well, yeah, I'm curious how everyone's family dinners looked when you guys were kids and how your dinners have changed today. In what way are you?
As a kid, the dinner was very, very important for my mom. So all of us being there has been, and that's something that I've that I took away from her was sitting down and eating dinner. That means putting your phones away or eating not Mexican food but tortellinis or something like that, which I do now, and it's funny because that I think about that space where we're just everybody is on their phone or on their computers or work, and then you have this 30-minute or an hour time for yourself and your family and your conversations that you can have one-on-one and get to know what happened to each other throughout the day.
It is definitely a privilege that I don't take for granted when I have the opportunity to cook for my family every day because I get to work from home. I have access to quality ingredients because, my husband and I are educated and earn a decent income. My kid has never really been hungry a day in his life. He's never had to go sneak into someone's yard and steal cherries out of their tree or, any of the kind of scrappy stuff that people under different circumstances have to do. And, and so I try to always make space at our table for expressing gratitude. And even if it's just hey, what's something funny you saw on the internet today? Just think about the ways in which your life is really good just for a moment. And, we're not the kind of family that holds hands and says prayers, but we do take just a moment to remember that everything isn't all that bad.
Yeah, I was also very fortunate to grow up in a family where my mother was very serious about the entire family having dinner together every night. And it wasn't until, friends would come over and have a meal when I realized how much time she would take in preparing. I wouldn't say elaborate, but I mean there was always a main course, a couple of side dishes, some white rice. They were elaborate.
Multi-course meals.
Yeah, so my mom's a great cook. So yes, I was lucky to have that. But it's funny as we're sitting here talking about this, I'm almost wondering if, Catherine, you have sort of a skewed sample size in asking this question, where it does appear that we are all people who grew up learning and knowing the importance of sitting down, having a meal together, paying attention to not just the food that you're putting into yourself, but also the conversations and the moments that happen around this very specific place that happens to be centered around food and around eating.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I'm the example of it going backwards in that I grew up with, a very stable family, and my mother would cook beautiful meals like the kind you're referencing, Erin. And now I am a single mom with 3 to 4 jobs, depending on how you look at it. So I am frantically throwing something on the table, or I'm yelling to my kids, get something out of the freezer, And so it's I feel like in my family, maybe the meal has been lost in a way that it sort of maybe reflects what's going on with our economy and politics and everything else. But anyway, we do sit down as often as we can, so I try to make it happen. But also today, kids are expected to be at sports and things in the evening. So but that's a whole other story. I mean, again, we should feel blessed that we are able to do sports. So anyway, but what I find interesting is that no one here has mentioned what they were eating.
Oh, growing up or today?
Or today. It's interesting. We think about this concept. We think about the social aspect, but not actually what's going into our mouths. It doesn't matter as much maybe as we think it might.
It matters so much to me, you guys.
Oh, does it?
I wouldn't say that I overthink it, but I use the dinner table to teach my son about the world because we don't travel a lot. Travel's expensive. And my son's old enough now that I could take him, but we just don't see much of the world very often. And so when I cook the food that my ancestors ate, which they were ethnic Germans in Russia, so Volga German food is a very specific kind of food that doesn't look like German food or Russian food. And so I make it on a semi-regular basis, and I tell him about his ancestors. And, I don't have women folk in my family to teach me these things. I had to learn myself. When I cook Korean food or Sichuan food, I tell him about the people as much as I can, like what kind of foods that they eat and like what kind of ingredients they use. And when I cook these things at home, I'm also able to introduce my son to flavors that he might be a little reticent to try if we were out at a restaurant. He's very afraid of things being too spicy, and so I can use the ingredients but use less chili or use less Sichuan peppercorn or whatever. I can make things to suit my family's palate.
I want to go eat family dinner with you, Heather.
I like the fact that you're introducing your child to different types of flavors and changing his palate, because that's what I do for mine as well too. Although I gotta be honest, I don't tell her anything about the foods of those people. I straight up, that's something. It doesn't come out of my mouth. So like, eat that. I made it today. Here you go. And and one of the things that that I've noticed is that she's, when we go out, she's very open to eat many things that we have. I'm unfortunately allergic to fish, so I can't really have certain things. But she eats anything. But we can't tell her that it has like chili or something that's spicy, because then she won't eat it. Even though like if it does, and if we don't tell her, she'll eat it anyway.
Yeah, I usually try to just push the limit and see what 'cause sometimes he can handle more than he thinks he can.
It's funny for me looking back at the food at our family dinners. It really encompasses a lot of what we've been talking about all afternoon when I talk about nostalgia. And I think, it's not a unique story among first generation immigrant kids here. But for me, it was very, in hindsight anyway, like identity building in terms of my mom cooked Chinese food at home. I knew at school I would get pizza and spaghetti. And like you try to sort of, now I see myself navigating, those two spheres specifically and what was served at those meals. At the time, it was just sort of like, oh, okay, you don't really think about it. This is Chinese food. You eat it. It's great.
One time my son came home from school and said that one of the girls sitting next to him in the cafeteria said, "Your mother makes disgusting lunches." Because he had like fermented pickles and like nori and stuff. And he doesn't, and I told him, I was like, she has insulted your family. She has insulted your culture. But it's not really his culture, and he doesn't have to live with any of the baggage of growing up in a house that smells like fish and smells like, seaweed. And so I just told him to tell that girl to, mind her business, and that it's not okay to yuck someone's yum, and finding a way to just express that to him, that like what people eat is who they are. That's
It's hard. I think when I was growing up, when assimilation was all you wanted as a 8 or 9-year-old, it was like, oh mom, can you please make me a sandwich? Can you please make me something normal? I'm using air quotes here, because I got made fun of for bringing noodles into school. Again, I think that's a pretty common experience that would have happened 25 years ago, and I'm bummed to hear that it still happens now.
It's still happening, but like I didn't mention my son is a Caucasian, and so that's what I mean when I say he'd have to live with the baggage. Well, even like my grandfather's generation, as first generation German Americans from Russia, so they weren't even really German. They spoke a funny version of German. World War I was just kicking off, and in Portland they were changing all of the street names that had German names to American war generals, and my grandpa used to get the crap beat out of him for being a little German kid, and so his family stopped eating rye bread. They stopped reading German newspapers, and they had to switch to American food also. And so that connection to their heritage and the previous 150 years of their lives was completely severed in one generation. And I didn't get to have any of those foods that I think are so important in helping me understand where I came from.
And yet now sausages are considered American. Like a Reuben sandwich on rye bread is considered American.
Right.
It takes a little time, and then suddenly it is American. The kids, at least at my kids' school, everyone has to bring those packets of dried seaweed. Those are all the rage. And someone was just mentioning seaweed being,
Somebody, dissed my kids' nori.
Yeah, but I feel like seaweed's the next thing. It's kind of like the next bag of chips thing that every kid feels like they need to have. So it changes so quickly.
It does.
Well, I'm sorry. I think we have to wrap things up. This has been a really fun discussion, and I'm looking forward to celebrating July 4th by eating a wide range of foods. So let's do our dessert course, where we go around and each share something that we've been enjoying this week. I want to circle back because I meant to mention this earlier. So my dessert course is going to be that everyone should listen to episode 65 of Racist Sandwich. in which Juan interviews Daniel Hernandez, the editor of this fantastic site you have to check out called LA Taco. I get lost in it. It's so great. So everyone go back and listen to episode 65 of Racist Sandwich.
Where can we find that podcast, Catherine?
Where can we find that podcast, Juan?
We can find it anywhere. iTunes. We're also on the NPR podcast network as well too. And Anchor, Spotify, anywhere.
Awesome.
Anywhere really. Yeah. Or on our website, racysandwich.com.
All right.
Get those clicks.
Heather, did you bring a dessert item?
My dessert course is I was doing some research for a completely different project that I'm working on. And so I was watching some kawaii metal videos on YouTube, which I'm really into. And so I was watching the video from a band called Baby Metal. They're Japanese. I love them so much. And people get so mad.
Yeah.
But I love how Rob Zombie totally had their backs.
Nice.
So I was watching the video, Renge Chance. It's this like heavy metal. They're these really adorable teenage Japanese girls dressed in this like perfect con gear. They shred so hard, and then they're singing about ramen, and it's exquisite.
Wait, so you might need to translate for those who don't
Just
get all your
Google,
references.
look up on
what is
YouTube.
con gear?
Oh, like they're going to like a Comic-Con or something.
Yeah.
They're in their cosplay. So yeah, just look on YouTube, look up Baby Metal, Renge Chance.
How do you spell renge?
Renge, and then chance, like the take a chance.
I'm totally looking it up. But
Yeah. Oh, and then so Lady Beard is the front man in Baby Metal, and he's this Australian bodybuilder who dresses like a girl. And I don't know if you have any kind of like divergent tastes, but yeah, he's a real special cup of tea.
I think I need to play this at our next family dinner.
You too. I played it for some Japanese exchange students once, and they were just gobsmacked. They're like,
Oh, well, thank you. Erin, did you bring a dessert item?
I did, but I'm going to throw that out the window and be a good editor and continue to plug a couple of my favorite stories in Eater's Mexican Food in America package, which came out a few weeks ago now. But one related very much to the conversation we were having earlier and what you said, Juan, about how a lot of Mexican-American food just became so reliant on the ingredients you had at hand. One piece in that package looks at the history of the Kansas City taco. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
Yes, which is a taco that is topped with Parmesan cheese. Given that there was a large Italian-American population in the city at the time it was developed, and essentially how now in this, like era where everyone wants like the very authentic thing, that it's actually putting this, very regionally specific dish at risk, which is really fascinating and worth a read. The other piece I wanted to mention briefly is a story by Amy McKeever, which is about Chopes, which is a restaurant in New Mexico. That's been around for generations, literally the third generation is now running it. And they originated as essentially a restaurant that would feed braceros, who were Mexican laborers who, in arrangement with the United States government, would come across the border to work here temporarily. And this story looks at that restaurant and where it is now, and it's meaning to the community at a time when, obviously, our relationship with immigrants in Mexico, and specifically, is very fraught. So both those stories are on eater.com.
Yeah, that is such a good package. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
I
every
love
story
it.
in there.
Yeah.
How about you, Juan? Did you bring a dessert item?
So I've been watching Roy Choi's Broken Bread.
yeah.
I'm a big fan, and as an Angelino, I have to support. But yeah, Roy Choi has always been doing great stuff for the community. I grew up in South Central, and he opened up Local L in Watts, maybe a 10-minute drive from where I grew up. So, he's been doing a lot of great things, hiring folks with it from the community. I think he's on the works of making the local close, so I think he might be opening up another restaurant. But yeah, so he has this show where he interviews. It's kind of like if the Racist Sandwich had a TV show, I think. But yeah, Roy Choi's Broken Bread, and he has this Cooking with Chefs or Chef's Kitchen. I'm not sure.
Oh, the Chef Show.
The Chef Show.
Yeah.
The Chef Show. Yeah.
That was funny.
So I was watching that as well. So I've been on the Roy Choi, clout lately.
There's so much good food TV these days. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, panelists. You guys are awesome. Juan Diego Ramirez, freelance journalist, producer of the Racist Sandwich podcast. It was so nice to have you here. Erin DeJesus, deputy editor at Eater. And once again, everyone check out that package, The United States of Mexican Food. Is that what it's called?
Yes, or something like that.
Check it out. It's so many good articles that everyone needs to read them all. And Heather Arndt Anderson, botanist, food historian, blogger, and author, an expert in so many foods.
Thanks for having me on. I love coming on your show.
I love having you here. Today's episode was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, at the studios of OPB. Izzy Kramer is our tireless and multi-talented assistant producer. Our editor is Keelan King, who also composed our new theme music. Special thanks to sound supervisor Stephen Cray, and today's audio tech, Nalene Silva, and the web staff at OPB, who bring our show to life on the Oregon Public Broadcasting website. You can check out our website, thefourtop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, donate to our show, and reach out to us on social media. And if you have not already subscribed, please do on iTunes, NPR One, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. Thanks, and happy 4th of July, everybody. Bye.